Committee will come to order. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, is it the policy of your office for U.S. attorneys to use prosecutorial quotas?
I'm sorry, I'm having a little difficulty hearing.
Okay, I'll get right on top of this thing. Is it the policy of your office for U.S. attorneys to use prosecutorial quotas?
To prosecute?
Yeah, do you have any prosecutorial quotas system in place?
No.
None whatsoever. That'd be anathema to your office then, right? I mean, it's not a policy. So would you be...
We don't, correct, we do not have quotas.
Right. And so would it be consistent with that when you have a prosecutor said that they're going to he wants to prosecute at least 2,000 people who are alleged to have committed a certain type of crime?
So look, I think you're referring to the January 6th question.
I'm just asking you, would that be consistent with your office's policy if somebody said we're going to get up to 2,000 people on a particular crime? Is that consistent with your policy?
I think what that U.S. Attorney was referring to was a prediction for how many more cases would still be brought because the court had asked how many more people have been
filed a letter with the
identified.
court saying that we're looking at upwards of 2,000. We've got 1,200 more that we think we're going to get. So you don't do that for anything else, right? So you don't have anything like tax fraud. You're not saying, okay, we're going to have so many people that we want to get for tax fraud, so many people we want to get
we don't
lying on
have
federal
quotas.
firearms applications.
If a court asks us what the likely workload will be based on prosecutions and investigations that are pending, the U.S. Attorney is obligated to respond.
Did you guys provide any reference of the number of people you thought you would prosecute who were involved in the 2020 summer riots of the burning of the Portland courthouse while there were still people inside those courthouses? You didn't ever file with the court or anything, say, oh, we think we're going to have another 300, 400, whatever it may be, because you didn't file those charges, did you?
I'm sorry, I'm not following. I believe that
I'm sure you're not.
The number that you're asking about was
Let me ask you this question.
objection that the court had asked the U.S. Attorney to make.
Let's switch topics. Maybe this one would be easier to follow, I suppose. Is it the policy of the DOJ to provide advance notice to subjects before conducting a search for evidence?
It totally depends on the circumstance.
If the circumstance were that you had a guest house where the U.S. Attorney, Deputy U.S. Attorney saying, well, we know that we suspect there's a lot of evidence there, but we're not going to really follow that up. And calls the attorney from the other side saying we were going to do a search warrant. Would that be consistent with your policy?
Okay, again, I know this is no hypothetical, and I don't know the facts of this case, and I don't know what happened, and I believe the events you're talking about, as reported in the press, occurred under the previous administration. So no, that event didn't happen in the previous administration. Let's talk about that. I mean, you keep saying this happened in the previous administration. But let's talk about this for just a moment. You keep saying, I don't know what happened there, but I'm going to opine when it happened. Do you see the fallacy of that, the inconsistencies? I don't know when it happened. I don't know what happened because I'm not involved, but it happened under the previous administration. That's so logically fallacious. I'm sorry, I'm not following what's
Yeah, I know you're not following. So the question is, you've got one of your deputy U.S. attorneys calling the attorney on this side saying, look, we're going to go to these two places, probably go in the next couple of days. And, of course, then ultimately the search warrant is called off. I just want to know, is it consistent to call up people where you know that they've got boxes of information, or you suspect they have boxes of information? That's why you got the warrant. That's why you're going to go look. And you give them a heads up so they can move those boxes of information. Would that be consistent with DOJ policy?
I'm just going to say again, you're asking me actually to comment about allegations in a particular case about which
No, I'm not. I'm
context.
asking you, is that consistent with your overall policy? Forget Delaware and what they did and that they actually did that. Let's just talk about generic policy.
I'm sorry, I thought you were asking about Mar-a-Lago. I may not have understood then. I'm sorry.
Yeah, la-di-da. So when we're talking about this, when we're talking about your general policy, is it your policy? Is that acceptable when you suspect that there are movable items to call up and say we're gonna be there to look?
Yeah, there's no policy on this question. The strategy and tactics to be used to preserve evidence are left up to the investigators and officers on the ground. Sometimes it would be a serious mistake to call up. Sometimes it would not.
And here, once again, you don't know what happened in the Hunter Biden case because that's somebody else is doing it. But you can be sure of the timing of when all this took place. That is one of the biggest oddities of your testimony today. I yield back to the gentleman from Colorado.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you for your decades of faithful service to our country, to our Constitution, and to the rule of law. Thank you for putting up with this today. The American people are watching. They know what's going on here. This is a gross misuse of your time, your team's time, and our time. It is a shameful circus. It has a goal. The goal is to spew lies and disinformation, ultimately to tear away at the confidence of our independent institutions, in your case today, our very important Department of Justice. That's the exact MO of a former president. Tear away at the confidence of our independent institutions, whether it's our electoral system, the Department of Justice, the judiciary, and independent news media. The American people are watching this sham. But it's not just a circus, it's dangerous, and you know that, and you have mentioned that. I believe that these fictions and fantasies are dangerous. Dangerous for you and the 115,000 public servants with whom you work. Dangerous for national security. Dangerous for communities' security. Dangerous for the rule of law and our Constitution. All at the same time of a looming shutdown. The other side of the aisle cannot govern. And so they have this hearing, which was supposed to be oversight, and use it as a big distraction because they are failing to govern. Imagine if we go into a shutdown. What does that say to your members of your department? What does it say to our service members, U.S. troops who would be training, fighting without pay and without confidence in this country's governing ability? It's a great distraction. So let me pivot to something I care about, and I know you and your department cares about. It is Recovery Month. And for families like mine with a member in recovery, every month is Recovery Month. So I thank you for what you are doing on the fentanyl crisis, the overdose crisis that has claimed 110,000 lives in a single 12-month period. 300 souls a day, every day. Souls who have died while we were in this hearing, every day. What is the department doing to combat the trafficking, to combat the amount of fentanyl on the ground? As DEA has said, there's enough fentanyl on the ground right now to kill this entire population multiple times over. Tell us about your important work in fentanyl.
Well, Congresswoman, let me begin by saying I share your personal concern and grief over this. I have met with the families of children, of teenagers, of elderly people who have become addicted to fentanyl and who have died from fentanyl. Everything you're saying is correct, and it's a catastrophe for the country. So as a consequence, the Justice Department has poured its resources, particularly from DEA, with FBI assistance as well, and with fugitive arrests by the Marshal Service and with gun tracing by the ATF into the entire process by which fentanyl reaches the United States. So we have sanctioned the precursor companies in China. We have indicted some of them for their violations. We have arrested some as far off as in Fiji and brought them back to the United States. We have traced these precursors to Mexico, where they are made into the fentanyl pills. Fentanyl costs about 10 cents to make. It can be sold on the street in the United States between $10 and $30. You can see what the enormous profit motive is here. So we must stop the cartels themselves. I have, as I said, traveled to Mexico twice in order to work with our counterparts in the military and law enforcement there.
I thank you for all of that. I want to just pivot once, and I want to do anything I can to partner with you on this issue so that we stop losing people. I traveled recently with the Foreign Affairs Committee to The Hague, met with the extraordinary folks, the top prosecutor and his able team. They were very complimentary of the Department of Justice and your work. Can you tell us about your important role, or America's important role, in war crimes, especially in light of your powerful history?
Yes, I'm happy to. So I've traveled to Ukraine twice and to meet with the Prosecutor General there. And I'm going to meet with him again this week here, and he has met with me several times here. The Justice Department is pursuing the war crimes from Russia's unlawful and unjust invasion of Ukraine to help to investigate war crimes over which we have jurisdiction, to help the Prosecutor General in Ukraine investigate those prosecutions. I was, I believe, the first cabinet member ever to visit The Hague, the International Criminal Court of Justice, and to meet with Karim Khan, who is chief prosecutor, to talk about our cooperation in respect to the investigations that they are doing. I've assigned a Justice Department prosecutor to the investigatory body that's been set up in The Hague for the crime of aggression. And she is there now working with the ICC and with Europol and Eurojust. And I've assigned a prosecutor to our embassy in Kyiv to work with our ambassador there and to work with the Prosecutor General's office there.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing that answer to go on, because it is critically important. America is indispensable, and your work is indispensable. Thank you, sir.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Mr. Attorney General, do you support the consent decree that I believe was put in place in the city of Minneapolis?
I'm sorry, do I support the?
Do you support the consent decree that was put in place with the police department of Minneapolis?
One was put in place by the federal government, yes.
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 Do you support fewer cops on the street?
Do I support?
Fewer cops on the street?
No, I don't support fewer cops on the streets.
That's what's happening as a result of what's
I don't
happening.
think that's a consequence of the consent decree.
Do you support?
Minneapolis has been losing police officers for many years.
Yeah, do you support more crime?
Do I support more crime?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
So there was just a hearing in Minnetonka, Minnesota, a tiny suburb of Minneapolis, just I think this last week, where they're beside themselves with the amount of crime that continues in Minneapolis since the riots of 2020. And I would point out to you that I had an officer in my district. I lived right across the border in Wisconsin, or that's where my district begins. A police officer was shot to death as a result of a weak-on-crime prosecutor in St. Paul and Minneapolis, Minnesota. Guy served only 4 years for a violent crime. Do you think that that's a problem?
If an officer was shot to death, that is certainly not an appropriate sentence. That's outrageous. Let me be clear, we are doing everything we can to assist Minneapolis. We have a very aggressive U.S. attorney who's brought a number of RICO and Vicar cases. Been
Let me continue.
Extraordinarily successful.
I got a real short period of time here.
Sorry.
In regards to disrupting drug networks, why do you think there's so much fentanyl coming into the country?
Because it costs 10 cents to make, and it can be sold for $30.
So Sheriff Mark Daniels from Cochise County, Arizona, sat right where you were at a few months ago, and under oath he said, the reason there is such a drastic increase in fentanyl coming into the country is because on January 20th of 2021, open borders policies were announced by President Biden. Have you expressed concern about those open borders policies that have led to this rapid increase in the amount of fentanyl coming into our country?
I can't associate myself with the conclusion reached by the sheriff, although I can certainly commiserate with the concerns.
So the sheriff is incorrect.
Look, the cartels in Mexico are bringing this causing this drug to be transmitted into the United States, and we were doing
Terrific.
everything we can to eliminate that incentive.
Yeah, you're not going to do it on doing that. Mr. Chairman, just so we're real clear here, this is the same answer we received from Secretary Mayorkas a couple months ago when he was in denial about a sheriff who lives, one of the most reputable sheriffs you'll find in the United States of America, sitting down there on that southern border. He sees it every day. He saw it working in 2020 because he told me when I was down there. And now he says it is not working, and it started January 20th of 2021. You can pretend that you're dealing with fentanyl. You're not, because the borders are wide open. Do you believe, I'm going to shift to combating gun violence. Do you believe that a prohibited person that acquires a gun illegally and disposes it in a dumpster where a criminal or an innocent child could gain access to it should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law?
This is no longer a hypothetical question. You're referring to a specific case which is now in judicial determination before a court of law. It's not appropriate for me to comment on that case.
So, for the record, Mr. Chairman, let's understand that the same prosecuting attorney who is now the special counsel gave a sweetheart deal to that person. And yes, you are correct. We're referring to the president's son. He got a sweetheart deal, and the judge was smart enough to smell a rat when she saw it, and she said, you guys go back to the drawing board. That same special counsel is in charge of this investigation. Isn't that correct, Mr. Chairman? Absolutely. I want to close real quickly with this. There was a World Naked Bike Ride in Madison, Wisconsin, just a couple months ago, and I sent you a letter 2 months ago asking if you had a problem with that because it exposed a 10-year-old girl by the race organizer, the bike organizers, to pedaling around Madison, Wisconsin naked. Do you think that's a problem? And why did you not answer our letter from 2 months ago?
I'm sorry, I'll have to ask the Office of Legislative Affairs to get back to you about this.
Does it typically take 2 months to be able to answer questions like this?
No, it sounds like you're asking about a question about state and local law enforcement. We get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters. I'll ask the Office of Legislative Affairs where that letter is.
State and local law enforcement would not act. We were hoping you would. It's obvious you're not. I yield.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Mr. Attorney General, for joining us and for your patience with this questioning. I'm honored to represent a diverse community in North Carolina. Wake County has worked to welcome people of all backgrounds, ethnicities, and religions. The growth and success of my district in the Research Triangle Park depends on our commitment to celebrating the many cultures that contribute to our community. Unfortunately, over the past few years, these very communities that have contributed so much to my state and my district have found themselves under attack. Jewish leaders in my district have received threats to themselves and their synagogues as recently as last month. HBCUs across our state have locked down in response to bomb threats. Asian Americans in North Carolina and throughout the country have found themselves facing slurs and threats spurred in large part by the racialized language about the COVID-19 pandemic. The Southern Poverty Law Center reported in late 2020 that the number of white nationalist groups grew 55% between 2017 and 2019, noting that the rise in hate-based attacks coincides with the growth of the white nationalist movement. And the Anti-Defamation League relatedly found that white supremacist propaganda incidents occurred over 14 times per day on average in 2020, with a total of 5,125 reported cases, nearly twice the number of cases reported in 2019, and the highest number the ADL has ever recorded. This dangerous trend has continued in the last few years and has recently included as active clubs have been increasing in their number and prominence. These active clubs started popping up in late 2020 and are a network of white nationalist groups that see themselves as fighters in training for an ongoing war against a system they claim is deliberately plotting against the white race. As Attorney General, I am deeply interested and concerned about the rise of these clubs, threats of violence, and actual violence, and wanted to know if you're familiar with these activities and what your department is doing to counteract them.
So I'm not familiar with the specifics of those clubs, and I will certainly look into what the department's doing in that respect. Very soon after I came into the department, I saw the spike in hate crime threats that were being made and in actual acts of violence. I directed the department to develop a strategy for responding to that. 30 days later, that was pretty much coincident with Congress's passage of the COVID No Hate Act. And we have now fulfilled, I think, all of the obligations under that act. We have task forces set up to investigate and prosecute hate crimes, both as hate crimes and where they satisfy the requirements as domestic violent extremism or as domestic terrorism. We have brought dozens of cases against people who have made these threats, as well as, in particular, those who have attempted to carry them out. And as you know, we have a prosecution pending in Buffalo with respect to the horrendous killing of Black Americans in the Tops grocery store by an avowed white supremacist.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your efforts in this regard. On a different subject with my last 45 seconds, North Carolina also saw the impact of cyber crimes with the Colonial Pipeline.
Yes.
And I'd like to know how your office is counteracting any cyber attacks and dealing with people who perpetrate them.
Yeah, so we are vigilant to the risk of these kind of cyber attacks. In that case, these were criminal gangs affiliated in Russia, resident in Russia. Fortunately, we had available intelligence from Section 702, which we were discussing a little bit earlier today. I have to say that's one of the principal sources of our ability to fight these kind of cyber attacks, whether they are criminal or whether they are launched by nation states, whether they are attempting to get ransomware and create ransom, whether they're simply trying, or also simply trying to exfiltrate our information, or whether they're trying to prevent our computers from working at all. The Justice Department has established a cyber task force for this purpose, a ransomware task force, and we are recently working on cryptocurrency in exactly the same way.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. We want to try to move quickly.
Thank you. I yield back.
Attorney General, because we got votes and then we got
Of course.
majority conference. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Attorney General, welcome, and my friend and colleague from Colorado outlined your biography, I thought, very well. But he left out 2 points that I'd like to mention. One is, not only did you lead the prosecution of the Oklahoma City bombing case, but in that case, the death penalty was asked for and actually received, and Timothy McVeigh was executed. Not exactly a Democrat priority to seek the death penalty in cases, but you did so because of the rule of law. You did so because the facts and the law demanded that you did so, and you followed the facts and the law in that situation. The other issue I wanted, or example in your bio that I wanted to point out, is my understanding that in your conference room, you have a portrait of Elliot Richardson. And the reason you have a portrait of Elliot Richardson is because he demanded that the Department of Justice stay independent from the Nixon administration. He had the backbone to stand up to the President of the United States and make sure that the Department of Justice would not become the government's lawyer. You put that portrait there soon after you became Attorney General because it was a signal. It was a signal to the world that you wanted to be known in the same way that others that had come before you were known. And frankly, one of the reasons I respect Attorney General Barr so much is because after January 6th, he made the very difficult decision to walk into the president's office and tell the president the election was not stolen. We have looked at this. And for that reason, he resigned before January 20th when power was turned over. But Mr. Attorney General, you're unable to answer some questions here, but I'll answer them for you. Do you know what people would have said if you had asked for U.S. Attorney Weiss's resignation when you became Attorney General? I'm sorry, U.S. Attorney, yeah, U.S. Attorney Weiss's resignation. They would have said that you were obstructing the Hunter Biden investigation, that you were firing a Republican appointee so that you could appoint a Democrat to slow walk this investigation and lose the leadership of that investigation. If you had made the same decision a year later because you were frustrated that the prosecution wasn't moving fast enough, they would have again said that you were interfering with the prosecution. If you, when U.S. Attorney Weiss asked to become special counsel, if you had made the decision then to appoint someone else to special counsel, people would have criticized you because you would have been taking someone out of the investigation that knew the facts, that could lead the investigation, and put someone in who would have had to come up to speed on the investigation and wouldn't have allowed major decisions to be made until they came up to speed. So in three different opportunities where you could have acted, you would have been criticized either way, whether you acted or did not act in that situation. Far from slow walking, really, once the Trump administration decided that that was the person leading the investigation, your hands were tied. You didn't have the opportunity to make a decision on the leadership of that investigation. But speaking of slow walking, I appreciate your reference in your opening remarks, your written opening remarks, to the Department of Justice strongly supports efforts by Congress to promote competition in digital markets by passing legislation to prohibit certain anti-competitive practices by dominant online platforms. You can't say who they are, but I can. Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google are monopolies, and they have been harming this country and harming competition in that particular market for years. And Congress for 5 years has been investigating and offering bills on that subject. They spent $250 million, according to reports, in the last Congress to defeat those bills. And now we do nothing in this Congress to try to deal with that very serious issue. In fact, there are efforts, I'm told, over in the Senate, and I use the word effort and Senate very carefully in the same sentence, but there are efforts in the Senate, S 2321, to take $50 million in funding for the Department of Justice Antitrust Division, and it would be an 18% cut, and to move that money to the General Department of Justice Operations Fund to try to further cripple the efforts that are going on in court. The state attorney generals and the Antitrust Division and Federal Trade Commission are doing a great job jointly in trying to combat the scourge of these monopolies. My question to you is, will you make sure that the Antitrust Division is properly funded so it can continue this very serious effort at stopping these monopolies from harming our children, from harming competition, and from further strengthening China's position in this area?
Yes, I absolutely will. And one of the first things I did in the first budget opportunity we had was to ask for more money for the Antitrust Division than had been given in quite a long time, and to ask for the fees that are paid for purposes of merger analysis be given to the Antitrust Division directly rather than to go into a general fund.
Thank you. I yield back.
I would just point out for the record that Attorney General Barr left the Trump administration on December 23rd, 2020, not between January 6th and January 20th, 2021.
Mr.
With that, I recognize the gentlelady.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, since he mentioned monopoly, could I also enter into the record this article about the MasterCard Visa duopoly by Proactive and their target of a bipartisan bill to reform this monopoly? Could I insert that into the record, please?
Yeah, without objection, unanimous consent accepted. Gentlelady from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Attorney General Garland. St. Louis and I are here today to make clear what it means to promote equal justice for every person in this country. Attorney General Garland, you often speak about your commitment to supporting civil rights and the rule of law. But I have concerns about whether the department under your leadership is doing the absolute most it possibly can to advance these goals. In the limited time I have, I want to share my concerns about specific issues with you directly and to make clear the steps that I believe that the department needs to take. First off, as this hearing has shown, a small number of the department's cases get an outsized level of attention in politics. But the reality is you preside over most of the federal system of mass incarceration. And every day in courtrooms around the country, including St. Louis, prosecutors who ultimately report to you are continuing to disproportionately prosecute disproportionately Black and brown people for disproportionately low-level immigration and narcotics and firearm offenses. And under your watch, the federal incarceration rate has increased for the first time in nearly a decade. Meanwhile, corporate crime enforcement is lower than it was during the Trump administration. The department needs to rethink its entire approach to prosecution, but let me also say I thank you for what you're doing with the insurrectionists. And I urge you to take specific steps towards ending mandatory minimums and prosecutory misconduct waivers and actively supporting alternatives to incarceration, funding federal public defenders, use of clemency power, and reporting on disparities in federal prosecutions. I'm also deeply concerned about the Bureau of Prisons. Director Peters is not doing enough to address the rampant issues of abuse and mismanagement at the Bureau, which affects both correctional staff and people in custody. It is shameful that solitary confinement has increased in the Bureau of Prisons during the Biden administration, despite the president claiming he supports ending it. We need to see more from the department across the board on Bureau of Prisons oversight. And you should implement the president's commitment to end the torturous practice of solitary confinement once and for all. I'm also incredibly disheartened that the department has continued to pursue the death penalty despite the president's pledge to end it. I urge the department to reverse course, including by dismantling the federal death chamber in Indiana and advocating for the commutation of the sentences of everyone on federal death row. I'm also still waiting to see any meaningful progress on the commitments that Associate Attorney General Gupta announced in June 22 around the enforcement of Title VI and the Safe Streets Act. I'd also like to, and I'm going on, but I'm taking my time. I also like an update on when the department will respond to the Oversight Committee Democrats' letter from June 2021 about the memo issued by the Trump administration's Office of Legal Counsel concerning the Equal Rights Amendment. That deeply flawed memo is preventing the Archivist of the United States from publishing the Equal Rights Amendment as the 28th Amendment. I know that OLC issued a short clarification after you took office, but the wording was not a clear repudiation of the Trump-era memo. I urge you to fully withdraw the Trump OLC memo, which is baselessly obstructing constitutional gender equality for all. Finally, I cannot overstate how shocked I am by the targeting of protesters who oppose the construction of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, or Cop City, and I urge the department to investigate these obvious violations of civil rights. These may all seem like unrelated issues, but to me, to my constituents, to countless advocates, and to people who are most directly impacted, they are interconnected, and they all speak to whether the department under your leadership will advance justice or simply pay lip service to it. Given the limited time that we have, I don't expect you to comment on all of these issues, but I have a question. Will you commit to working with me in my office on these issues, including having your staff promptly, by writing your position and sending that to us, reaching out to us about all of the issues that we just spoke about?
I'd be happy to have the Office of Legislative Affairs work with your staff. I want to say I could not be prouder of the civil rights record of this department. It is the fundamental basis for why the Justice Department was founded. We have a history of also being obviously involved in the 1960s When I came to the Justice
And
Department.
I'm going to stop you. I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I just want you to understand where I'm coming from, the things that I would like to see. I don't mean to cut you off, but I need to reclaim my time. Finally, I want to remind everyone yet again that this is what good faith oversight looks like, not the Republican playbook of running interference for a twice impeached, 4 times indicted white supremacist demagogue who would rather overthrow our democracy than admit he lost an election. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank the chairman. Thank the Attorney General for being here before us today. On October 21st, 2021, before this committee, I asked you about Mr. Scott Smith, a father in Loudoun County, Virginia, who was arrested at a school board meeting where he questioned the rape of his daughter in a bathroom in the public school there. You said at the time you were unfamiliar with the case. Are you now, yes or no?
I'm only familiar to the extent I've read about it in the press.
You sent a memo on October 4th, 2021, directing the FBI and U.S. Attorney offices to address, quote, harassment, end quote, of school boards. Yes or no?
I sent a memo to address violence and threats of violence in connection with school personnel.
Directed at school boards.
Not directed at school boards, directed at school personnel, school administrators.
Throughout the
board
country
members.
as a priority for the federal government, for the United States Attorney's Office. That followed a letter on September 29th, 2021 from the National School Board Association to President Biden and emails from the National School Board Association Director Chip Slavin to the White House in which the White House asked for specific threats. And one of the examples was Scott Smith. Subsequent to our hearing 2 years ago, 26 states left the National School Board Association and Slavin resigned on November 23rd of 2021. Last week, Mr. Smith was pardoned by Governor Youngkin. Do you think the governor was correct, yes or no?
Pardon authority belongs to the governor.
You don't have an opinion on whether the governor was correct?
I don't know the facts of the case, so I'm not in a position to make.
Have you rescinded the memo that you issued in 2021, yes or no?
What we're discussing.
Have you rescinded the memo, yes or no?
What we're discussing here occurs.
Does the memo still exist? Is it still going, yes or no? Has it been rescinded?
The memo was intended to have meetings within 30 days.
Has it been rescinded?
The 30 days have finished. Nothing has happened in more than a year and a half with respect to that
But it
memo.
has not been rescinded, it has not been
nothing
pulled back.
to rescind.
Despite evidence that has come out from the National School Board Association, commissioned report that White House officials discussed this with DOJ more than a week before the letter was sent. The NSBA apologized. Have you apologized, yes or no?
I've testified 7 times since that original memo.
Well, it's the first time you're back here since we talked about it.
I'm sorry?
It's the first time you're back here in front of us. Have you apologized for putting that memo out that implicated Scott Smith as a domestic terrorist, something the governor of Virginia has now pardoned him from all of these accusations?
The memo said nothing about him, nothing about parents being terrorists, nothing about attending school boards.
The answer is it's not been rescinded and you haven't apologized for it.
The answer is that's not
labeling an American citizen a domestic terrorist in a memo and referring to it and a memo that's built on the back of that. But now we had this compliments being driven to the Civil Rights Division. Let's talk about Mark Houck in Pennsylvania, a father who was arrested with heavily armed federal and local law enforcement in front of his wife and children. This after Mark Houck's lawyers had said he would appear voluntarily. Local authorities investigated, found no case. Mark Houck was arrested by the FBI for FACE Act violations. The jury met for an hour. Houck was acquitted. Now, when I was in federal court, I don't remember that being my result very often. In fact, I don't remember happening at all, where we took it to a jury and it was acquitted after an hour. Did you investigate this or question the United States Attorney why they wasted resources for such an obvious result? And can you explain, yes or no, that that was a good use of the Department of Justice's authority?
The Justice Department respects the jury's verdict. The decisions in that case were made by agents and prosecutors on the ground.
Are you concerned that enforcement of the FACE Act has been biased towards pro-lifers over anti-life protesters, 126-4 by our count? And we're asking information to be able to track down the information of such prosecutions, but 126 times against pro-lifers versus 4 times for people who dare to question the issue of life. I'll leave that out there just to say that is the Civil Rights Division at play. Meanwhile, we've got the very liberal progressive groups being targeted as well. Senator Cruz and I sent a letter to you asking for information about how the FBI informant had gone to a liberal group's pro-life meeting, and yet we didn't get any response from you. So I'd ask if you would respond to our letter that we sent back in March asking about FBI infiltrating such a meeting.
I don't know what you're referring to, but I will ask the Office of Legislative Affairs to look into this letter.
Thank you. Finally, are tax cases require approval by Maine Justice no matter what district has venue? Yes or no? Do tax cases as a general matter require approval by Maine Justice no matter what district has venue? Yes or no?
It depends on the circumstances in the example that I know you're referring to.
Generally speaking, yes. Since Maine Justice runs tax division, yes or no? Maine Justice runs the tax division.
In the Hunter Biden case, I assured Mr. Weiss that
That's not what I'm asking about. I didn't ask it. I haven't mentioned that guy's name. I didn't. I very simply asked a very simple question.
Okay.
Do tax cases require approval by Maine Justice as a general matter?
Most of the time, but not when the Attorney General has granted authority to a U.S. attorney to do what he thinks is best.
And in a turf battle, if tax division approves changes,
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
I mean, I recall my colleague in Texas having a minute and a half of additional time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Attorney General Garland, thank you first and foremost for your public service and your dedication to justice. I'm delighted to see you here today. Thank you for appearing before us. I represent El Paso, Texas, a community right on the U.S.-Mexico border. And so we have been witnessing firsthand the abuses at the hands of Governor Greg Abbott through Operation Lone Star, which began in 2021. Governor Abbott has deployed state resources and Texas National Guard's members to the state's border with Mexico. And Operation Lone Star has created border management challenges. It's resulted in countless humanitarian and due process violations for migrants. It's harmed guardsmen assigned to the mission. It's cost the state billions of dollars, and it has completely undermined the federal government's authority over immigration. I sent you a letter, my colleagues and I, Democratic colleagues from Texas, sent you a letter in July about Abbott's floating barriers. I know that is now that case is going through appeal. But we have also learned that the National Guard a guardsman shot at a Mexican national across the Rio Grande. And on September 1st, I sent you a letter asking that the DOJ investigate that. We also know that Governor Abbott, we've learned from whistleblowers that he has ordered National Guardsmen to prevent migrants from turning themselves in to CBP, has even ordered that they push people back into Mexico. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to unanimous consent to enter into the record an El Paso Times article from earlier this week. Texas National Guard orders hundreds of asylum seekers on U.S. territory back into Mexico.
Without objection.
This, in addition to Governor Abbott separating fathers from their children and their families, it's egregious what is happening on the border via Operation Lone Star. Attorney General Garland, are you able to speak to any responses the department has had to Governor Abbott's blatant undermining of federal immigration authority?
I can obviously speak on the boys question. When we brought suit under the Rivers and Harbors Act for the interference with navigable waters, that case is still under adjudication in the district court.
I understand that. There are other issues, and want to make sure I flag them for you today at this hearing, but would also like for your folks to take a close look at the investigation that I've requested. And I will be sending a follow-up letter after what we've learned just this week from the El Paso Times.
Thank you.
Switching gears, I do want to offer you an opportunity for some rebuttal, because what we've seen from some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is their penchant for performance for Twitter and for other news programs. Mr. Attorney General, we've heard a lot of accusations regarding some U.S. attorneys' offices not partnering with Mr. Weiss and hypotheticals about what that means. Can you please explain the difference between partnering with a U.S. attorney's office and acting as a special attorney or special counsel?
I can talk about it, obviously, in the abstract and the theoretical. It's a normal process of the department if prosecutors from one area of the country and has a case that has significance in another, to speak with the U.S. Attorney in the other district, to find out what the policies of the district are, to find out what the practices are, to see how judges in that district react to different kinds of charges. Sometimes decision is made to partner together in those investigations, and sometimes a decision is made for the U.S. Attorney from the other district to have his or her own people bring those cases. I have personally been involved in, I think, 3 those cases during the period when I was an assistant U.S. Attorney, and over my entire career, I have been given 515 authority twice myself. For this purpose, it is not it is just a mechanical question of what courts require in order to make an appearance.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garland. Again, appreciate your public service to the American people. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Garland, for being here today. Every time I'm in my district, constituents are concerned about the weaponization of government, them being selected because they happen to be conservatives. And I think on your watch now, the DOJ actually is at a mid-30% approval rating. And, you know, every time the DOJ goes after Trump, he goes up in the polls. I think the American people are starting to wake up to what's going on, and I think it's fairly obvious. And the first question I have is, I understand now that we know that thanks to an FBI whistleblower, that the FBI received information on Americans from Bank of America. Specifically, Bank of America sent the FBI a list of customers who made transactions in the days on and around January 6, 2021. My question for you is, did the Department of Justice acquire any geolocation data from January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021? Yes or no?
I'm sorry, did you say locational data?
Geolocational data.
Geolocational, I believe everything that was done with respect to geolocational data was disclosed in the public filings in the January 6 cases. I don't have that at my fingertips, but this is a matter of public record.
Do you remember any specific analyses that you may have done with that data?
I'm sorry, I can't hear
Any specific analyses that you may have gotten from that data? Was there anything particular you were looking for, Mr. Attorney General? Like, did they exercise their rights? Did they maybe buy a firearm?
I'm sorry, I don't know anything about the second thing. The purpose, as I understood of the location data, was to determine whether people who claim they weren't inside the Capitol actually were inside the Capitol.
Well, where did the, I guess the question is, to your knowledge, and where the DOJ, geolocation data from external sources, entities, or organizations, to your knowledge, did you receive that from external sources, or are you buying that data?
So I don't know the exact answer in general, but I believe with respect to January 6th, these were the results of subpoena as issued to telephone companies.
So you subpoenaed the telephone companies and they got the data
Well,
from outside
this
sources?
requires orders authorized by the court.
Does it concern you that, you know, we talked about Durham's report earlier, that he said that the FBI's activities were somewhat sobering? Does that worry you on your watch that the activities of the FBI have been called sobering now?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Who calls it sobering?
John Durham in his report. Did you read his report?
I'm sorry, who?
John Durham.
Durham?
Yes, sir.
I did read the report. All those events had to do with the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. Is that what
That
you're
was part of it,
referring to?
yes, sir.
Yes.
Were you concerned when he said it was sobering what the FBI was doing?
I think Mr. Durham, and I just want to make sure everybody understands, Mr. Durham thanked me for not interfering with his investigation. I had promised he would be able to go forward without interference, just as I promised Mr. Weiss. Mr. Durham's, and I did not interfere with his report. His report reported a lack of analytical rigor and a number of other problems with respect to the investigation. I think both the Inspector General made a similar comments, and Director Wray has made the same.
Thank you, Attorney General. I don't have a whole lot of time. I want to yield a little bit to the chairman, but is it a crime in the U.S. to question an election?
I'm sorry.
Is it a crime in the U.S. to question an election? Is that a crime?
I'm sorry. It's my fault. I can't hear. To request a what?
Is it a crime to question an election in the United States of America? It is a crime. Is it a crime for the U.S. citizens to say, we want to ask about this election, we want to question this election, we actually want to look into the election. Is that a crime when citizens just question an election in America now?
Again, I think you're asking not a hypothetical, but something specific about specific.
I think that's just general. I don't think that's specific. Elections have been questioned for decades past. Is that now a crime in America?
Did you say to ask questions about an election? Is that what
To
you said?
question an election.
To question.
Just to
No,
question the
it's not
results.
it's not a crime to question elections.
Because I question the election results in 2020. And there are a lot of people in America that do. And they question the weaponization of government attacking American citizens. And so you, sir, have an issue with trustworthiness of the American people and with Congress at this point. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I'll yield 36 seconds.
No problem. Mr. Garland, did you consider, I just want to go back to this question, did you consider anyone else when David Weiss requested special counsel designation on August 8th?
No, Mr. Weiss asked to be made special counsel, and I did not consider an alternative. Of course, to have put in an alternative would have greatly disrupted an investigation that was already
I want to be
ongoing.
clear. He was the only one under consideration. It was either no special counsel, or if there was a special counsel, it was going to be the guy who presided over the investigation for the previous 5 years.
I thought about the possibility, what the consequences would be, both of not appointing him and trying to find somebody else at that time, but there was no other.
And you had no concerns. I mean, the whistleblowers have brought forward all kinds of concerns. Earlier, when someone brought those up, you said, well, those are allegations. I think they stand up well. They've been cross-examined for 4 hours by Democrats in the Oversight Committee. But there were two facts that can be questioned. Two facts about the investigation into Hunter Biden. Fact number one, they let the statute of limitations run. They let it expire. And fact number two, the plea deal fell apart. So I just wanted to make clear that the guy who presided over all that was the only guy under consideration for special counsel designation. Is that right?
Mr. Weiss is a person known for high integrity, for great experience in the prosecutorial realm, and he was appointed
But
by
again,
the president.
that's fine. You can say all that. I appreciate what you're saying there.
I
but
have no doubts about his abilities in this
he
area.
was the only one under consideration.
The question was whether to appoint someone, and I thought, I will say, what the consequences would be of trying to switch horses in midstream, but I did not consider any other person.
Okay, on July 10th,
no.
he wrote Senator Graham, and he said, I've had discussions with departmental officials. He said, I haven't sought special counsel status, but I've had discussions with departmental officials. And I don't know if this was asked earlier, who did he talk with then?
I'm sorry, you're talking about the letter that he sent to?
Senator Graham on July 10th.
Again, I'm not going to get into internal deliberations of the Justice Department.
Okay, fine. Is there one person, though, who's like the point person at the Justice Department for David Weiss as he now is functioning as a special counsel in this investigation?
Mr. Weiss is now subject to the special counsel regulations, which require urgent reporting under certain circumstances, require him to consult with numerous places within the Justice Department.
Fine, you're following the statute. God bless you. That's where it's supposed to happen. But you said there's reporting. Who does he report to?
Again, I'm not going to get into
Is it you?
I'm ultimately responsible.
Is it the DAG?
Mr. Weiss did not have to report to anybody. He was the supervisor and decision maker in these matters.
Okay. We have votes on the floor. We're going to have to take another break, Mr. Attorney General. We'll get back here as quick as we can, and we'll start with the Democrats.
Sure.